So what's good, TMG fam? It's your boy Ellen. I'm back with another reaction. And we made it, bro. It's Friday. I got y'all. But listen, I need y'all to be safe before y'all get into these weekend festivities. Salute to all the graduates out there, man. Big salute to all the graduates. You did it. And it wasn't an easy task. So salute to y'all, man. And before y'all get out there to all the festivities, man, I want to keep y'all safe. So we got to check out one of these cases to get your antennas up, all right? So this video here is the most twisted cases you've ever heard. Episode 7 documentary. Shout outs to Ewu, all right? So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. Join the fam. Make sure your doors is locked. Everything is secure. And here we go.
I don't know. Oh, wow. What is it? Baseball card.
20-year-old Laneige and her 16-year-old sister Trish were looking forward to the holiday season as they headed to their family's cabin in Utah, a place they fondly referred to as TD's Tranquility. At the time, the TD family viewed it as an escape from the world, but it would soon become a place of unimaginable horrors. Now, to say the cabin was isolated would be a total understatement. It was deep in the mountains, roughly 2.5 miles off the main road, and could only be accessed by snowmobiles in the winter. It was Christmas time in 1990, and
listen, I'm all about the cabin life, but you can only only access it through snowmobile? Yeah, that's putting yourself at a disadvantage. I ain't with that. My car need to be right there in front of the front doorsteps.
According to Laneige, her mother and grandmother had spared no detail when decorating their cabin for the holidays. My mom even had our Christmas stockings hung under the fireplace mantle, she remembered. On December 22nd, the TD family left the cabin and headed to Salt Lake City, where they planned to wrap up some last-minute shopping. Naturally, the thought of intruders breaking into the cabin while they were gone was far from their minds. But unbeknownst to anyone, 2 very dangerous men had done just that. As they made their way back, they were completely unaware that 2 ruthless killers were lying in wait and had even been videotaping themselves opening presents from under their tree.
What is it? Baseball card.
Laneige got back to the cabin first that afternoon with her mother Kay and grandmother Beth. She raced inside to warm her hands under hot water, but right away spotted something strange out of the corner of her eye. It appeared to be a figure darting behind the refrigerator, and at first, she just thought it was one of the cousins they were expecting for a visit. However, Laneige's blood ran cold when a frizzy-headed man came out from behind the refrigerator, holding a gun. Then, as her mother and grandmother came into view, another man wearing her father's sweatshirt and thick Coke bottle glasses emerged from a back bedroom with a gun. Assuming the motive was robbery, Kay briefly pleaded with the intruders to take whatever they wanted, but they responded by opening fire on the women. Laneige watched in sheer terror as her mother fell to the floor, turning briefly only to see her grandmother get shot in the head. 76-year-old Beth gasped for air one final time before the cabin went dead silent. As Laneige...
Now that seems a bit odd, right? They weren't after the valuables, the possessions. They automatically just shot? Something ain't right. Something
begged the men to call paramedics. They ignored her and went about throwing her mother and grandmother's bodies off the balcony. Laneige recalled one of them stopping to vomit in the bathroom and exclaiming, "This is sick. This is gross. This is disgusting." Laneige's thoughts went instantly to her sister and father, Rolf, who would be returning any minute. She frantically tried to devise a plan to keep them safe, but just moments later, the sound of the snowmobiles could be heard, and one of the men grabbed her from behind, wrapping his arm around her neck and pressing the barrel of the gun to her back. Rolf and Trish pulled into the driveway and were immediately ambushed by the other man, who led them into the cabin at gunpoint. Once inside, Rolf saw that his eldest daughter was being held hostage, with Laneige recalling, "My dad could see tears in my eyes, and it was an unspoken communication, and he knew at that point that something awful had happened to Mom and Grams." The intruders demanded money from Rolf, and he obliged, tossing whatever was in his pockets onto the floor. Then the man restraining Laneige told the other to shoot him, but for reasons unknown, he refused. So the man with Laneige took matters into his own hands. His weapon misfired twice, but the third shot struck Rolf directly in the face, and he fell to the floor. As the two young women watched on, the men began dousing the entire cabin in gasoline, which there was plenty of around the cabin for the snowmobiles. They then set the place on fire and demanded the girls load up the snowmobiles and get ready to leave. Doing as instructed, Laneige and Trish each got onto a snowmobile with one of the attackers behind them, and they set off, leaving Rolf for dead in the fiery blaze. It seems likely that the man who refused to shoot Rolf could be the man who vomited earlier. Given the physical response to the first killings, as well as the refusal to shoot the father, it appears that one of the men may have been having at least some second thoughts. If this is true, there could be several reasons why he didn't just leave or try to stop the other man. He may have been afraid of repercussions from his partner, who appeared to be calling at least some of the shots. He may have felt that there wasn't a safe way for him to get out of the situation. By choosing to not shoot Rolf, perhaps he felt like he was not as responsible for what happened. Even if one of the assailants didn't want to kill anyone but just agreed to a burglary, under the law, both would still be charged with the murder.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it don't matter, fam. That's like saying it was a robbery taking place, a bank robbery taking place, but you was only the wheelman. You ain't go in there and rob them. You didn't shoot anybody, but they did, and they killed somebody when they shot them. That you was just no. That ain't how it work, bro. No, you going down with everybody. You catching all these charges, fam. Like, I don't know what he think.
Anyone but just agreed to a burglary. Under the law, both would still be charged with the murder. For a defendant to be guilty of a crime, it's not necessary that the defendant do all of the acts of the crime. For example, if two people join in a common purpose to commit a crime, each of them is guilty of the crime, and is also guilty of any other crime committed by the other in the pursuit to commit the crime. This is called acting in concert. So even if the two men agree to just burglarize the home, but in doing so, one assailant shot someone, that other assailant can also be charged with that shooting, as it's a natural or likely consequence of committing the burglary. From the back of the snowmobiles, the sisters were secretly trying to find an escape. With Trish,
I feel like that needs to be talked about more often. You know what I mean? And you know how we talked about bringing up some of these things in schools and being taught this type of stuff. I feel like they should talk about that portion of it too. I feel like that gets skipped over. Because some people may think, okay, if we get caught, I'm only going to do probation, or I'm going to do a year or two because it's a robbery, or, you know what I'm saying? But you don't think about something going wrong. Number one, you're wrong for doing that, period. Number two, you don't think about if something goes wrong and somebody you with shoot somebody. Now y'all all going down for something, murder. You know what I mean? So you got to really, I feel like that should be talked about.
Later saying, snowmobiles, the sisters were secretly trying to find an escape. With Trish later saying, I had all kinds of different plans of how to wreck the snowmobile, how to throw him off into a tree, how to get rid of him. But all I could think of is I couldn't leave my sister. There was no one to help us. There was nowhere to go. Then they passed by the girl's Uncle Randy, who at first simply assumed they were out with new boyfriends for a joyride. However, as he waved to his nieces, they ignored him and passed right by out of fear that the intruders might kill him too. When they finally reached the main road, the two men forced Trish and Laneige into the back seat of their family car before speeding away. Trish glimpsed that one of them was also carrying a knife, and when he saw her looking, he said, "Don't worry, I'm just as good with a knife as I am a gun." Suspicions rising, Randy saw the car pulling out with the girls in the back and tried desperately to make them stop by yelling and waving his arms, but the girls continued to ignore him. At this point, he knew something was terribly wrong, but before he could stop to think, he heard another snowmobile in the distance. The first thing he noticed was that the rider wasn't wearing any protective equipment or warm clothing, but as they got closer, he realized blood was covering the person's swollen face. Then, it suddenly occurred to Randy, "Oh my God, it's my brother." Against all odds, Rolf had survived the horrific encounter by pretending to be dead when he hit the floor. After being shot and set on fire, he managed to rip off his burning clothes and hop on a snowmobile to rescue his daughters. He could barely muster the strength to tell Randy, "I've been shot, my wife has been killed, and my daughters have been kidnapped." Randy helped his badly bleeding brother into the back of his car, and he took off after the girls, trying all the while to reach service so he could call for help. Finally, as they caught up with the stolen car, Randy's mobile phone came into service and he called 911, yelling at the operator, "Guys, I need a helicopter now." Randy gave detailed instructions on where the car was headed, and the operator assured him that they had police in the area who would be there soon. Meanwhile, Trish and Laneige sat terrified in the back of the car as it sped more than 90 miles per hour down the road. They felt a quick wave of relief when they saw a police vehicle turn around and start following them, but all hope vanished when their captors sent the car plummeting down an embankment. Officers swarmed the crash scene with guns drawn, and miraculously, Trish and Laneige emerged from the wreckage unharmed, with their hands in the air, yelling that they were hostages. The two men surrendered and were instructed to get down on their knees with their hands behind their heads. Trish and Laneige believed their entire family was dead back at the cabin, so they were shocked to learn that their father was being airlifted from Randy's car to the nearest hospital in critical condition. The two suspects were identified as Vaughn Lester Taylor and Edward Stephen Deli, parolees who had recently run away from a halfway house they'd been staying at while looking for employment. The two men were previously in prison for art.
And we hearing about a lot of that lately. Escape convicts and people escaping and guards helping people escape.
Arson and aggravated burglary, respectively, but were now each facing first-degree murder charges. In addition, they were also charged with attempted first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated assault, theft, arson, and failure to heed a police signal to stop. The term aggravated is added to a crime when something is done to make the circumstances of the crime more serious. Here, the kidnapping and assault charge are aggravated because they committed these acts while brandishing a weapon. Authorities rushed to the crime scene, where the top floor of the cabin was still on fire. They quickly located the deceased bodies of Kay and Ruth, and noted countless bloodstains and bullet holes tarnishing the once tranquil vacation spot. Investigators also uncovered several vital pieces of evidence, including a tape from inside the family's video camera. The shocking footage revealed that robbery was not their only motive, and that the attackers had clearly intended to murder the family. They ate the family's food and even opened their Christmas presents on camera while waiting to strike. It later came out that they had called a friend back at the halfway house and bragged about their plans to kill a family and steal their car. Vaughn and Edward reportedly chose the location because one of them was familiar with the area, and when they discovered that people were home at the TD family cabin, they knew they'd found a target. With evidence mounting against him, Vaughn...
So all this was random? Just random. I know the area. There's cabins up there. Let's go. Let's just pick a random? I thought it wasn't random the way they showed up like that and what they did. I thought they knew one of them, had some history or something, but this is just random. Wow.
Vaughn pleaded guilty to the murder charges in 1991. He opted for a penalty phase hearing before a jury rather than a judge and was sentenced to death. Edward's trial took place a few weeks later, with his attorney arguing that Vaughn had done all of the shooting. Trish and Laneige gave heartfelt testimonies, confirming that Vaughn had been the one holding Laneige around the neck and that he was the one who shot Rolf. Edward was ultimately found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. While the family wasn't happy about Edward's sentence, they took immense satisfaction in seeing the look on his face when he realized Rolf was, in fact, alive. Trish later stated, "I remember watching the look on Deli's face as he came in seeing my father, and it was very apparent to me that he didn't know my father had survived, and the look on his face was just priceless, like he'd been defeated. My dad survived. We won." In 2001, Edward reached out to Laneige in a letter, expressing remorse for his actions and claiming to no longer be the same evil person. After 9 years of contemplation, she courageously accepted his apology as part of her road to recovery. On the other hand, Vaughn Taylor has attempted to appeal his conviction multiple times and argues that Edward did all of the shooting on that fateful day. The remorseless killer...
Ain't that crazy? How now you get behind bars and you turn on the person that you did this heinous crime, heinous act with. You turn and start pointing the finger just to try to get yourself off of death row.
Killer even claimed he had brain damage in an effort to be spared the death penalty. The vast majority of defendants that are given a life sentence or the death penalty try to appeal their case. If Von Taylor could actually prove that he had such severe brain damage and therefore wasn't competent to stand trial, his appeal would have been granted. That, however, was not the case here. The apology letter that Edward sent to Laneige may have appeared to be genuine since she eventually decided to accept it. From a psychological perspective, it would make sense if the man who was physically sick during the attacks, the man who refused to shoot Rolf, and the man who expressed remorse to the family were all the same person. We don't know if that is the case here. However, it does appear that Von Taylor failed to take responsibility for his actions. It appears that he lied when he claimed that Edward did all of the shooting, as the victims identified Von as the one who shot Rolf. Pathological lying, lack of guilt, and failure to take responsibility are all traits of a psychopath. In 2020, the U.S. District Court Judge Tina Campbell made a shocking decision to overturn Von's sentence, stating he'd not been given a fair trial. Oh, but don't worry. It was reversed in 2021 by a federal appeals court, and Von's now back on death row. Rolf passed away from cancer in 2008, surrounded by his loved ones, and his daughters will forever remember him as the hero that saved their lives. As for Laneige and Trish, they refused to let this tragedy define them and have since rebuilt the cabin in the mountains, where they enjoy spending time with their families without fear, because, as their father once said, lightning never strikes twice in the same location. And just like that, we're on to our next case.
Whew, did y'all do it? Go back there after that? I just feel like the trauma alone mentally would make it hard. I ain't gonna say I couldn't do it, but it would take some time. Mom, grandmom, everything we experienced, and then you would be uneasy being there because any type of sound, any type of, you know what I mean, strange noise, you'd be apprehensive, you'd be on edge, on guard. Like, could you really enjoy yourself there is what I would ask.
When Todd DePriest said goodbye to his wife Nancy as she headed off to work, he had no way of knowing that it would be the last time he'd ever see her alive. However, what initially seemed like a cut-and-dry case ultimately transformed into a high-profile fight for justice, spanning more than a decade. Born and raised in Texas, Nancy was a vibrant 20-year-old with a devoted husband and a young daughter they named Sylvia. On October 24, 1988, Nancy arrived for her shift at an Austin Pizza Hut at around 7 in the morning to prepare pizza dough before the restaurant opened. The young wife and mother was a reliable employee who would often work alone in the morning, and this day was no different. Still, her manager called just to make sure everything was going all right, but no one answered the work phone. After several more failed attempts at reaching Nancy by phone, her manager decided to check things out at the restaurant around 9:30. Upon entering the building, he quickly made a horrifying discovery. Nancy was clinging to life in a pool of blood, and she'd been tied up with her own bra. She was rushed to the hospital, but tragically succumbed to her injuries later that day. An autopsy concluded that her cause of death was from a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. Furthermore, the medical examiner noted that it appeared she had been assaulted prior to her murder. Back at the crime scene, investigators found no signs of forced entry and believed the motive to be robbery, as there was money missing from the restaurant's safe. While there wasn't much evidence to work with, at least not back then, a .22 caliber shell casing was discovered next to Nancy's body. Then, 2 weeks after the murder, 22-year-old Chris Ochoa and 19-year-old Richard Danzinger went to the Austin Pizza Hut for a bite to eat. The two were roommates who worked at another nearby Pizza Hut restaurant, but employees found their behavior that day suspicious. Beyond inquiring about her death to the security guard, they also appeared to make a toast to Nancy's memory, which prompted multiple mentions to the police. Investigators interviewed the two men as well as Richard's girlfriend Donna, who claimed they'd been together that evening. But just 2 days later, Chris confessed to his involvement in Nancy's murder and even implicated Richard in the crime as the shooter. The roommates were subsequently arrested and placed in jail while they awaited trial. Chris accepted a plea deal in which he would testify against Richard to have the death penalty taken off the table. It's common practice to give deals to one defendant in a multi-defendant case in exchange for their testimony when the prosecution can use it to prove their case. Richard's trial began in January 1990 with him pleading not guilty. Chris testified against his friend, but as a shock to the prosecution, he changed his story on the stand and said he shot Nancy, not Richard. Still, the judge found Chris's testimony very convincing based on the DNA evidence found at the crime scene and their odd behavior following the murder. So, despite the lack of physical evidence directly connecting him to the crime, Richard was found guilty after just 7.5 minutes of deliberation, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Now, it was Chris's turn to face the music. Instead of the death penalty, he pleaded guilty and was also sentenced to life imprisonment. 3 years into his prison sentence, Richard was brutally attacked by a fellow inmate, and while he survived, he was left with permanent brain damage. He was eventually transferred to a psychiatric prison in 1997. However, a year earlier in 1996, something happened that would turn this entire case upside down. A man named Joseph Marino, who was serving time in another Texas prison for robbery and assault, sent a chilling letter to the police saying he had been the one to kill Nancy DePriest. He cited newfound religious beliefs as his reason for confessing, as he stated in the letter, "I am 100% responsible for the death, the robbery, assault, and murder of Miss DePriest." Joseph may have wanted the chance to clear his conscience.
So who do you believe at this point? You know what I mean? Because it's not uncommon for somebody who's already going down for something else to take the blame for something somebody else did. I'm already going down. It's nothing I can do. I might as well free up somebody else. Say I did it. You know what I'm saying? So how do you believe that person?
Conscience, as it's possible the guilt had been eating away at him over the years. However, it's also within the realm of possibility that he wanted to take credit for the crime and show everyone that he had literally gotten away with murder. Joseph was already serving 3 life sentences for aggravated robberies when he confessed to killing Nancy, so he may have felt that the attention and notoriety he would receive would be worth any additional jail time he might get. Additionally, Joseph told them that they could find evidence at his home linking him to the crime. While the Austin police located a money bag, Nancy's keys, and the gun he claimed as the murder weapon in his residence, they still believed Chris and Richard were involved. So they worked tirelessly for 2 years to find any sort of connection between the 3 men. It's easy for police to get tunnel vision and confirmation bias in cases once they set their minds on a particular suspect as being guilty. Meanwhile, Joseph kept trying to get his story heard and even wrote a letter to then Texas Governor George W. Bush, saying, "You are legally and morally obligated to contact Danziger and Ochoa's attorneys." The letter went unanswered. Finally, in 1998, authorities notified the district attorney's office of the confession letter. They also visited Chris in prison to ask him about the possibility of a 3rd accomplice, but he stuck to his original story, insisting that he and Richard had acted alone. Sensing that something was going on in the case, Chris soon changed his mind and decided to reach out to the Wisconsin Innocence Project in 1999. He told them that he'd been coerced into a confession and that he and Richard were innocent. As a result, the organization...
At this point, I don't know who to believe, bro. I don't know. They spinning this situation crazy, like to the point where these detectives gotta have a headache, because who do you believe at this point?
The organization requested more advanced DNA testing on the samples collected at the crime scene, and in November 2000, the results came back. The DNA belonged to Joseph Marino, not Chris or Richard. As it turns out, the DNA testing in 1990 only analyzed a single gene, whereas the new test examined 10. Additionally, a ballistics test confirmed that the gun found in Joseph's home had been the one used to kill Nancy. So on January 16, 2001, after nearly 13 years behind bars, Chris Ochoa was released from prison at age 34. He was fully acquitted of the crime a few months later. Richard Danziger was also released a few months later, but the brain damage he sustained during his prison...
I was about to say, he done got brain damage in there. He done had to be transferred to a psychiatric ward.
Sentence left him needing lifelong care. Joseph further admitted to investigators that his motive for killing Nancy stemmed from his hatred for a female correctional officer he encountered while serving time in prison for robberies and other crimes. He decided that he would murder a woman who resembled her when he got out, and that's why he chose Nancy. Finally, he claimed that she had led him into the restaurant that morning because he was wearing a workman's uniform and claimed to be fixing a broken soda machine. Joseph was ultimately convicted of capital murder and given a life sentence for Nancy's murder. But that still begs the question, why would Chris confess to a crime he didn't commit?
Right.
Well, as it turns out, Chris, Richard, and Richard's girlfriend Donna had been interviewed by Detective Hector Polanco, a man known for cracking even the most challenging cases. Chris adamantly denied having any knowledge regarding Nancy's murder, but the interview pressed on regardless. Meanwhile, in a separate interview room, Donna explained that she and Richard had been together at her home that entire night. Richard also denied having any involvement in the crime, but detectives felt he knew details about the crime that were not public knowledge, although those admissions have never been fully disclosed. Although Richard never falsely confessed, it's interesting that in 52% of false confession cases that were later exonerated through DNA evidence, the exoneree included facts that weren't public in their confessions. This suggests that giving details about a crime that are not public knowledge may not be quite as indicative of guilt as police may think. As the relentless questioning continued, investigators told Chris that Richard would turn against him and that he needed to protect himself. This technique is called the prisoner's dilemma, where the suspect is set up in such a way that both parties choose to protect themselves at the expense of the other. As a result, both participants find themselves in a worse state than if they cooperated with each other. Some speculate that the detectives working this case used questionable techniques to garner information from him, such as throwing furniture and showing him graphic autopsy photos.
That's what it sounded like to me. It sounded like that they forced a confession out of those two by pitting them against each other and saying the other one saying you did it, and then in the other room they saying he's saying you did it. So who did it? And now you're in this room, lights are on you, people are breathing down your neck, and you just start making up stuff to try to get yourself out of it because you feel like somebody's in the other room painting you to be something that you, or saying you did something that you have no knowledge of. I think it sounded like they forced a confession.
2 days after the questioning began, Chris buckled under the pressure and signed a written confession that listed Richard as his accomplice. At the time, he believed this was the only way to avoid death by lethal injection. The confession stated that he and Richard had entered the Pizza Hut using stolen keys, and that together they had assaulted and killed Nancy. It also included fabricated details of the crime that would haunt the victim's family for over a decade. Moreover, Chris's inexperienced defense attorneys didn't believe in his innocence and were solely focused on avoiding the death penalty. So they urged him to testify against Richard and basically just throw him under the bus. It's possible that the reason Chris changed his story about who shot Nancy during Richard's trial is because he felt guilty for blaming his friend. He may have felt that since he was now safe from the death penalty, he could try to undo the damage that was done toward Richard. Chris only stuck with his story when the police visited in 1998 because he knew that it would be nearly impossible to secure parole if he started denying his guilt. Chris and Richard ultimately received millions of dollars each in settlements. However, Richard also sued Chris for false incrimination, which he willingly settled over a hefty sum. Of his confession, Chris stated, "I know people think no reasonable person would confess to something they didn't do. Who the hell is reasonable in that situation? You're not normal. You're there, never been in trouble before. You've been taught to respect officers with guns. They put you in a room. They've got the badges. What are you gonna do?" According to the Innocence Project, there have been 375 DNA exonerations in the United States. Of these, 29% involved false confessions. In 49% of those false confession cases, the false confessor was 21 years old or younger at the time of arrest. It seems surprising that someone would confess to a murder they didn't commit, but in fact, in 130 of these DNA exoneration cases, the exoneree was wrongfully convicted of murder, with most of these, 62%, involving false confessions.
That's why I like things are recorded nowadays. You know what I mean? These interrogations are recorded. And a lot of times you've seen them make their way to the public. We get to see them. We get a backseat as to what took place inside that interrogation room, and I feel like a lot of people back in the day didn't get that opportunity, man, and they ended up going to jail for crimes they didn't commit.
People may falsely confess to a crime as a way to get out of a stressful situation, such as the interrogation, or to avoid punishment, which in this case would be the lethal injection that Chris was threatened with. A suspect may also confess in order to access a reward, such as being able to go home or speak with family. In interrogations, police sometimes use high-end inducements, which means that suspects are led to believe that they will receive a lower punishment if they confess, but a higher punishment if they do not confess. Chris may have felt like there was no way out with some kind of punitive outcome, so he chose to confess in order to get the lesser punishment. Alright, on that note, let's move on to our last true crime story. When paramedics responded to the call of 2 dead bodies at the Durham family home in Sand Lake, Michigan, they had no idea that they were in for the shock of a lifetime. While moving the bodies, one of their supposed murder victims suddenly came to life, unleashing a web of lies and betrayal. Still, just when investigators thought they'd hit a dead end in the case, a most unlikely witness came forward with a chilling account that didn't fly well with anyone. 46-year-old Martin and 49-year-old Glenna Durham were a married couple of 11 years who shared 5 children from previous relationships. In 1995, Martin was involved in a devastating car accident that horribly damaged the left side of his body and brain. His injuries rendered him disabled and resulted in significant memory loss, thus leaving him unable to work. So the family was forced to rely on Martin's disability checks and whatever the government paid Glenna to care for her husband. Still, their real money troubles came from Glenna's gambling addiction, and she would frequently visit casinos. Martin was much more frugal with his spending, so naturally this habit didn't sit well with him, and the couple often argued about their financial problems. As Martin's physical health continued to deteriorate, Glenna took complete control over their bill payments, but by this point her gambling addiction had spiraled out of control. However, when a man showed up to repossess one of their vehicles in 2010, Glenna somehow convinced Martin that it was all some big mistake. 5 years later, the local newspaper published a notice about their home going into foreclosure, and Glenna offered her husband the same weak excuse. It seemed like everything was starting to fall apart. Then, in May of that...
I mean, how many more things need to happen before you understand it's real? Like, is stuff getting repossessed? Your home in foreclosure? Like, at some point in time, you can't believe her.
Same year, one of the Durham's neighbors noticed that it had been 2 days since they last saw Martin or Glenna. The worried neighbor went over to investigate but was greeted only by silence, so they ventured further into the house. Upon entering the living room, a gruesome discovery was made. The bodies of Martin and Glenna were sprawled out on the floor. Martin was dressed in only his underwear, and Glenna was fully clothed with a blanket covering her lower half. There was blood all over the place, and the neighbors struggled to locate a pulse on either body, so they immediately called 911. Paramedics arrived on the scene and found Martin deceased from 5 gunshot wounds. Glenna also appeared to be dead from injuries to her head, but when emergency workers went to move her body, they were stunned to realize she was still alive. Glenna's breathing was shallow, and her body jolted once before being rushed to the hospital.
What y'all think? She did him in and then tried to do herself or make it look like a robbery, stage a robbery, did something to herself? That's what I'm thinking right now. I don't know if it's going to play out that way.
In the ambulance, she was incredibly confused and combative to the point where she needed to be restrained. Medics said she asked several times, "Why are you doing this, Marty?" Doctors determined that Glenna had suffered 2 minor bullet wounds at the hospital, but they said she would survive. However, once recovered, Glenna claimed to have no recollection of the events that led to her being shot.
But you got minor bullet wounds and he got major. That don't add up. Somebody comes in your house, they're a great shot towards him, but bad towards you? Nah, that ain't adding up. Again, it's making me look at her.
An autopsy confirmed that Martin had died from 3 close-range gunshot wounds to his chest, with 2 additional rounds fired into his back and lower arm from farther away. It's possible for memory loss to occur following significant trauma, which could be one explanation as to why Glenna allegedly couldn't remember anything about being shot. Meanwhile, back at the Durham home, investigators tried to make sense of the bizarre crime scene. Based on the circumstances, they assumed a third individual was involved, but found no evidence suggesting a break-in. Those close to Martin expressed to officers that he had been very wary of intruders and kept his doors locked and deadbolted at all times. Nevertheless, detectives did locate a Ruger single-6 pistol under a chair in the living room, along with various ammunition scattered throughout the house. The next day, some of the couple's children returned to the home to clean and uncovered a manila envelope in the living room filled with letters written by Glenna. Specifically, the letters seemed to imply that she was planning to take her own life and included apologies to her loved ones. She even wrote one to her ex-husband, asking him to watch after their children when she's gone. Investigators questioned Glenna about the letters, but she claimed to have no memory of writing them. Moreover, she told detectives that she had no reason to kill herself or
Told you we can't believe her. We can't believe her.
Martin, saying, "I wouldn't shoot my husband. I'd be better off divorcing him and leaving him." Her explanation seemed fishy to investigators, but they didn't have the evidence needed to file any charges, so they tried to glean as much information as possible from those close to the Durham family. One relative commented to detectives. She indicated he was a pain in the ass to take care of, and one of these days she was going to kill him. Authorities also requested access to Glenna's cell phone records, which showed that she had used her internet browser the day before the shooting to look up Ruger pistols. The web pages visited included Ruger Inside Out, Ruger Safety Blue Book, and Ruger New Model Single-6 single-action revolvers. But of course, Glenna denied ever visiting those sites from her phone, alleging that she only used her phone to play games. Then someone else started talking, and I'll give you a hint. It wasn't Glenna. Instead, a video released by Martin's ex-wife showed his beloved pet African gray parrot, the only witness to the shooting, reenacting what appeared to be their final fight.
Oh, whoa. You are lying. You lying. A parrot is about, this is gonna be, this is about to be crazy. No.
In the video, which quickly went viral, the parrot moves from side to side while changing its voice to reflect two people bickering, possibly Martin and Glenna.
Get your over now! Shut up, later.
Finally, the bird exclaims, "Don't shoot," which some family members strongly believe was the last thing Martin ever said. Martin's ex-wife stated, "To listen to the whole 2-minute rant and to know Marty and to know Glenna and to know the things that they would say to each other, it's haunting. My house turns cold. I get chills when I hear it." The shocking video ultimately put even more pressure on the police to make an arrest, but they still wanted to ensure the case against Glenna would hold up at trial. So the lead prosecutor communicated with experts worldwide about using the parrot's statements as evidence, but couldn't justify the admission. This evidence is extremely interesting from a legal and evidentiary perspective. It is obviously highly unusual to have an animal as a witness that makes a statement. All out-of-court statements, whether by a person or, in this case, an animal, is considered hearsay. Hearsay evidence is usually inadmissible at trial. The reason hearsay is barred as evidence is because one cannot cross-examine the person who is making the statement, since that person is not in court. This case is extremely unique in that the parrot could technically be presented in court, but there's no way to cross-examine a parrot, and its statements cannot be deemed reliable. Just when it appeared the trail was running cold, police received results from the ballistics test run on the pistol found under the chair, which confirmed it to be the murder weapon. Moreover, handwriting tests concluded that Glenna had been the one to write the letters found in the home. Roughly 1 year after his death, investigators finally had enough evidence to arrest Glenna and charge her with Martin's murder. In July 2017, Glenna Durham stood trial for her crimes, with the prosecution arguing that she had intended to take her own life along with Martin's, but backed out on the plan. They also emphasized Glenna's extensive gambling habits and the couple's crippling financial issues as a motive. The theory that Glenna was planning on taking her own life as well makes sense, given the apology letter she left behind. If she'd been planning to kill only Martin and pretend that they'd both been shot by a third person, It seems unlikely that she would have left such incriminating letters in the home. In addition, it's possible that Glenna may have been experiencing caregiver fatigue or burnout, which is a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion as a result of caring for her husband after his car accident. In fact, one symptom of caregiver burnout is feelings of wanting to hurt yourself or the person for whom you are caring. There was clearly no squawking in the jury because after just one day of deliberating, Glenna was convicted of first-degree murder and a felony firearm charge. She was sentenced to life in prison without a chance for parole and is currently carrying out her term at a women's correctional facility in Michigan.
I don't care what you say, the parrot solved the case. The parrot solved the case. Who would have thought you go into the pet store, getting these parrots, falling in love with them, one day would solve the case of what you did to your husband. That's, bro, we've seen a lot of things on this channel, fam. That ranks up there. That ranks up there, bro. Oh, I was like, no, are you kidding? Man. Listen, man, y'all get at me in the comment section, bro, and let me know what y'all think about this. It's your boy, man. Until next one, I'm gone. Peace.